The salt-laced air of the Maine coast did little to clear the heavy cloak of grief that had settled over Blackwood Manor. My mother, Abigail Vance, had been gone for 3 months, and the sprawling stone estate felt both vast and suffocating without her vibrant presence. I, Eleanor Vance, found myself adrift in a sea of legal documents and the quiet echoes of a life that was no longer mine alone to navigate. My husband, Thomas Croft, 7 years my senior despite our shared 42 years, moved through the manor with a practiced ease that had always felt slightly performative. He'd adored Mother, or so he'd claimed, and now busied himself with the affairs of the house, a role I found myself increasingly ceding as my own energy flagged. And then there was Garrett Sterling, Mother's husband of 10 years, my stepfather. He remained a quiet, almost spectral presence in the manor, his silver hair and gentle eyes carrying a perpetual look of bewildered sorrow since Mother's passing. Our relationship had always been one of polite distance, a quiet acknowledgement of shared space rather than true familial bond. He was a kind man, I thought, if a little lost. The will, a labyrinthine document drafted by Mother's longtime attorney, Elias Thorne, was as complex as Blackwood Manor itself. It spoke of trusts and clauses, conditions tied to the estate's historical preservation, and provisions for Garrett's continued residency. It was clear Mother had gone to great lengths to protect her legacy, a legacy that now rested largely on my shoulders. Thomas, despite his outward support, had shown an almost unsettling interest in the financial specifics, far beyond what I'd expected from someone who claimed to find such matters tedious. He'd pore over the spreadsheets I left on my desk, asking questions that were sharp and precise, unlike his usual vague pronouncements on wealth management. It was late October, the leaves outside the library window a riot of burning oranges and reds, when the first shard of suspicion pierced through my grief. I was walking towards the library, intending to retrieve a file, when I heard voices from inside. Thomas and Garrett. Their conversation was hushed, urgent, and laced with a tension I'd never heard between them. I paused outside the heavy oak door, not intentionally eavesdropping, but something in the tone held me frozen. "The clause about residency," Thomas was saying, his voice low. "It's the key, Garrett. If she can't prove continuous residency, or if the upkeep isn't maintained to the letter, there are alternatives." Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. "But Abigail wanted Eleanor to have it. This was always meant for her." "Wishes are one thing, Garrett. Legalities are another," Thomas replied, a cold edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. "And frankly, Eleanor is too caught up in grief, too emotional to handle something of this magnitude. It needs someone practical, someone with foresight." There was a pause, a rustle of papers. "Someone like us." My blood ran cold. Someone like us? The implication hung in the air like the scent of decay. This wasn't about comforting a grieving widower or discussing mundane household matters. This was about the will, about Blackwood Manor. And they were discussing it in hushed, conspiratorial tones, excluding me, the very person Mother had intended to inherit. I backed away silently, my heart pounding against my ribs. The grief was still there, a dull ache, but now it was overlaid with a sharp, sickening jolt of fear and profound unease. My analytical mind, usually a source of calm logic, was racing, trying to make sense of the fragmented words, the chilling implication. What exactly were they planning? And what did it mean for Mother's legacy, and for me? Current part characters, 3,496. Total characters, 3,496. The incident in the library was a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of doubt through my perception of my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeply wrong was unfolding beneath the surface of polite mourning. Thomas's behaviour, which I had previously attributed to concern or perhaps a slightly overzealous attempt to be helpful, now seemed tinged with a calculating edge. He continued to ask questions about the estate finances, the maintenance schedule, the legal requirements outlined in the will, but now his questions felt less like genuine interest and more like probing for weaknesses, for angles. Garrett remained quiet, his usual gentle demeanour seemingly unchanged. Yet I felt a new, subtle tension in his presence, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes when he looked at me. My analytical mind, trained over years in corporate law to dissect complex situations and identify potential risks, kicked into overdrive. I didn't confront Thomas immediately. My instinct, honed by years of navigating corporate politics, told me that a direct accusation without concrete proof would only drive the scheme underground, making it harder to uncover. I needed to observe, to gather information, to understand the full scope of what was happening. I began subtly. I started keeping the estate documents locked away, citing their sensitivity. I monitored Thomas's phone calls and computer activity, not through anything overtly illegal initially, but by paying attention to who he spoke to, what websites he visited when he thought I wasn't watching. I noticed an increase in calls to numbers I didn't recognize, calls that were always taken in private, in hushed tones reminiscent of the library conversation. His internet search history, which I managed to glimpse one evening, revealed searches related to property law, inheritance disputes, and the intricacies of wills in Maine. These were not the searches of someone merely trying to be helpful. They were the searches of someone actively investigating legal loopholes. I also started spending more time with Mrs. Gable, the estate caretaker. She had worked for my family for over 30 years, her knowledge of Blackwood Manor and its history far surpassing mine. I asked her about recent visitors, unusual deliveries, anything out of the ordinary she might have noticed. Mrs. Gable, a woman of quiet observation and deep loyalty to the Vance family, mentioned seeing Thomas and Garrett meeting privately several times, sometimes with a third person she didn't recognize, a man in a suit who arrived discreetly and left just as quickly. This confirmed my suspicion of a planned external element to their activities. My investigation soon led me to Elias Thorne's office in Portland. Elias was a man of impeccable integrity, his office smelling faintly of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent of stability in the swirling uncertainty of my life. I explained my suspicions, carefully detailing the overheard conversation, Thomas's unusual interest in the will and the clandestine meetings. Elias listened patiently, his expression grave. "Abigail's will is complex, Eleanor," he said, leaning back in his chair. She was determined to protect this estate, to ensure it remained in the family and was properly maintained. There are indeed clauses regarding residency and upkeep. Should those conditions not be met, or if the primary beneficiary, that's you, Eleanor, is deemed unable or unwilling to fulfill them, the will makes provisions for alternative arrangements. It's designed to prevent the estate from falling into neglect or being sold off piece by piece. There are provisions for a trustee to step in, or even for the property to pass to a designated alternative beneficiary if certain conditions are triggered. My blood ran cold again. And who is the alternative beneficiary? Elias paused, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and concern. In the event that you cannot or do not inherit and maintain the estate according to the will's strict conditions, the will designates Garrett Sterling as the next in line. With conditions, of course, regarding his ability to maintain it, and failing that, a historical preservation trust. Garrett. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. Thomas wasn't just trying to steal the estate from me. He was trying to steal it through Garrett. He was manipulating my stepfather, convincing him to participate in a scheme that would somehow trigger the clause that would pass the estate to Garrett, with the ultimate goal of then taking it from Garrett. But how? Marrying Garrett? Convincing Garrett to sign it over? Exploiting Garrett's perceived inability to manage such a property alone? The possibilities were horrifying, each one a testament to Thomas's cold, calculating greed. He had married me for access, and now he was using my stepfather as a pawn in a twisted game of inheritance. The revelation about Garrett being the alternative beneficiary solidified my fears and sharpened my focus. Thomas's scheme was audacious, built on exploiting the complexities of my mother's will and manipulating a vulnerable, grieving man. My grief for mother was now intertwined with a burning anger at the betrayal and a fierce determination to protect her legacy. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house, it was the heart of my family's history, a place imbued with memories and the spirit of generations. I would not let Thomas Croft, this man who had lied his way into my life, desecrate it with his avarice. Working closely with Elias Thorne, I began to build my case. Elias guided me through the legal intricacies, explaining the types of evidence we would need to demonstrate Thomas's fraudulent intent and manipulation. We focused on gathering proof of the conspiracy. I discreetly installed sophisticated monitoring software on Thomas's computer, which I could access remotely. I also placed a small, high-quality voice recorder in the library, where I suspected they held their most sensitive discussions. The digital trail Thomas left was damning. Emails exchanged with a man named Mr. Silas, the third party Mrs. Gable had seen, revealed Silas to be a disreputable lawyer specializing in challenging wills and exploiting legal loopholes. The emails detailed their strategy. They planned to subtly sabotage the estate's maintenance, creating a paper trail of neglect. They would also subtly undermine my capacity to manage the estate, perhaps by encouraging my grief or suggesting I was overwhelmed, hoping to build a case that I was failing to meet the will's conditions. The ultimate goal, explicitly stated in one email from Thomas to Silas, was to have the estate passed to Garrett, at which point Thomas would handle Garrett, ensuring the property eventually transferred to him. The specific mechanism for handling Garrett wasn't fully clear, but the implication was chilling. It involved coercion or further manipulation, perhaps even marriage to Garrett if other options failed, though that seemed less likely given Garrett's nature. Thomas's emails also contained cold, calculating remarks about my emotional state and Garrett's perceived weakness, referring to us both as obstacles to be managed. The voice recorder in the library captured conversations that were even more damning. I listened, sickened, as Thomas coached Garrett on what to say to Elias Thorne, or to me, guiding him on how to emphasize the burden of the estate, how to express doubt about my ability to manage it. Garrett's responses were hesitant, often tinged with unease. He sounded less like a co-conspirator and more like someone being pressured, manipulated. Thomas's voice, however, was sharp, persuasive, utterly devoid of warmth. He spoke of millions, of the lifestyle the estate could afford them, painting a picture of ease and security for Garrett that was clearly designed to overcome his reluctance. Garrett repeatedly expressed concern for me, asking, "But what about Eleanor?" Abigail wanted her to have it. Thomas would brush off his concerns with reassurances that it was for the best, that I would be taken care of. Vague promises that masked a clear intent to sideline me entirely. The evidence piled up. Emails, recordings, search histories, financial records showing Thomas making payments to Silas. It painted a clear picture of a calculated, cold-blooded scheme driven by pure avarice. The man I had married, shared my life with, was a stranger, a predator who saw me and my family's legacy only as a means to an end. The pain of this realization was profound, a deeper wound than even my mother's passing. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a complete erasure of my reality, a betrayal of trust so absolute it felt like a physical blow. Elias Thorne reviewed the evidence, his face grim. "This is strong, Eleanor. This isn't just grounds for divorce. This is evidence of attempted fraud and manipulation. We can use this not only to ensure Thomas gets nothing from the estate, but potentially to protect Garrett as well, demonstrating he was coerced." The path forward was clear, though daunting. Divorce. A public unravelling of the life I thought I had. But it was necessary. Necessary to protect Mother's legacy. Necessary to reclaim my own life from the grip of a man who had never truly seen me. The strategic determination hardened within me, eclipsing the initial shock and pain. I would not be a victim. I would be the guardian of Blackwood Manor, and I would dismantle Thomas's scheme piece by piece. With the evidence secured and a clear strategy in place with Elias, I prepared for the confrontation. It wouldn't be an emotional plea or an attempt at reconciliation. It would be a clinical dismantling of his lies, a demonstration that I knew everything and that his game was over. I chose the library for the setting, the very room where I had first overheard their hushed conspiracy. Its walls, lined with generations of Vance history, felt like silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. I arranged for Elias to be present, ostensibly for a meeting about the estate, and asked Thomas to join us. Garrett was not included. I wanted to confront Thomas alone first, to see his reaction when faced with the undeniable truth. The air in the library was thick with unspoken tension as Thomas entered, a forced smile on his face, his usual smooth demeanour in place. He sat opposite me, Elias beside me, a silent, professional presence. "Eleanor, Elias," Thomas began, his voice light. "What is this urgent meeting about? More complexities with the will?" I met his gaze, my own expression carefully neutral. Thomas, I said, my voice steady, this meeting is about your complexities, not the wills. His smile faltered slightly. My complexities? Elias spoke then, his voice calm and measured. Mr. Croft, we have reason to believe you have engaged in a deliberate and fraudulent scheme to gain control of the Blackwood Manor estate. Thomas's face paled. He glanced from Elias to me, his eyes darting nervously. What are you talking about? That's absurd. Is it? I asked, picking up a folder I had placed on the table. Inside were printouts of his emails with Silas, transcripts of the library recordings, screenshots of his search history. I slid the folder across the table towards him. We know about Silas. We know about your plan to sabotage the estate maintenance. We know about your efforts to portray me as incapable. And we know about your intention to handle Garrett once the estate passed to him. He grabbed the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he leafed through the documents. His eyes widened as he saw the irrefutable evidence, the cold, calculating words he had written and spoken laid bare. The colour drained from his face, leaving it a sickly grey. This is a fabrication, he stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. Eleanor, you're imagining things because of your grief. Don't, I said, my voice hardening. Don't insult my intelligence. I have recordings, Thomas, your own voice outlining your plan, discussing how you would manipulate Garrett, how you married me for access to this estate. He flinched as if struck. The smooth facade shattered completely, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. Anger flared in his eyes, quickly followed by a twisted form of justification. You think I wanted this? He spat, gesturing around the library. This old drafty mausoleum? I married you because you had access to wealth, to status. My background, you have no idea what it's like to claw your way up to be looked down on. This estate, it's worth millions. It could have given us everything. Us? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. There is no us, Thomas. There never was. There was only you and your insatiable greed. Garrett was going to get it anyway if you messed up, he yelled, his voice rising. I was just ensuring it went to someone who could actually appreciate it, make something of it. You're too sentimental, too stuck in the past. And manipulating a grieving old man, using him as a stepping stone, was your solution? Elias interjected calmly, his voice cutting through Thomas's outburst. That's not foresight, Mr. Croft. That's predatory. Thomas slumped back in the chair, defeated. The bravado vanished, replaced by a pathetic, self-pitying air. I wanted a better life, he mumbled, no longer meeting my eyes. You wanted this life, I corrected him, my voice cold. My mother's life, my family's legacy, and you were willing to destroy anyone who stood in your way. The confrontation was over. There was nothing more to say. I had my confession, his true nature laid bare. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a grim satisfaction. His scheme was exposed, he would not win. Current part characters, 3,997, total characters, 15,488. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal activity. Elias Thorne wasted no time. Divorce papers were filed immediately, citing irreconcilable differences, and, more importantly, providing evidence of Thomas's fraudulent intent regarding the estate. The evidence of his scheme became central to the divorce proceedings, particularly concerning the division of assets and his claim to any part of my inheritance or the manor itself. I also had the difficult task of speaking with Garrett. I approached him gently, explaining that I had uncovered some disturbing information regarding Thomas and the estate. I showed him the transcripts of the library recordings, letting him hear Thomas's manipulative words, how he had been coached and used. Garrett listened, his face growing paler with each word, his gentle eyes filling with a mixture of shock, hurt, and profound sadness. He said it was for the best, Garrett whispered, his voice trembling. He said Eleanor was struggling, that the estate was too much for her, and that he was just trying to help me, help us, secure the future. He lied, Garrett, I said softly. He wasn't trying to help you. He was trying to use you. He saw you as a way to get the estate, believing that if it passed to you, he could then take it from you. The realization hit Garrett hard. He looked utterly devastated, not just by the betrayal by Thomas, but by the fact that he had unwittingly participated in something that could have harmed me and gone against Abigail's wishes. Abigail, she would be so disappointed, he murmured, tears welling in his eyes. She would be heartbroken by Thomas's actions, I agreed, but she would be proud that we stopped him. Garrett's loyalty to Abigail and his genuine affection for her memory proved stronger than any influence Thomas had held over him. He was appalled by the depth of Thomas's manipulation and readily agreed to cooperate fully with Elias and me. He confirmed the pressure Thomas had put on him, the coaching, the attempts to isolate him and make him dependent. His willingness to provide a statement to the court, detailing Thomas's coercion, was invaluable to my case. Thomas, initially defiant, quickly realized the strength of the evidence against him. His lawyer, likely advised by Silas, attempted to portray it as a misunderstanding, a husband simply trying to help his wife manage a complex inheritance. But the recordings and emails were too clear, too damning. His explicit statements about marrying me for access and his plan to handle Garrett left little room for alternative interpretation. The legal battle, while emotionally draining, was relatively swift due to the overwhelming evidence. Thomas's claims to any share of the estate were dismissed outright. The court saw his actions for what they were, a fraudulent attempt to gain control of valuable property through manipulation and deceit. He was left with nothing but his personal belongings and the debts he had accrued in pursuing his scheme. The divorce was granted, the marriage dissolved, freeing me from the man who had woven himself into my life under false pretenses. News of the scandal, though contained as much as possible by Elias, inevitably filtered out into the local community and the social circles Thomas had so desperately sought to enter. His reputation was ruined. The superficial charm and ambition that had defined him were now seen as the mask for a cold, calculating predator. The status he craved was replaced by social ostracism and contempt. Garrett, deeply affected by the experience, decided he could no longer remain at Blackwood Manor. The memories of Abigail were too intertwined with the painful realization of how he had been used. He chose to move closer to his own family, seeking a quieter life away from the grandeur and the ghosts of the manor. We parted on good terms, a new, albeit strained, understanding between us, born from the shared ordeal. He apologized profusely for his unwitting role, and I reassured him that I knew he had been a victim of Thomas's manipulation. With the divorce finalized and Thomas vanquished, the final step was to secure Blackwood Manor fully in my name. The legal transfer, overseen by Elias, took several months, involving navigating the specific requirements of Abigail's trust and the state of Maine's property laws. It required significant funds for the transfer fees and the immediate necessary maintenance to ensure the estate met the will's conditions, maintenance that Thomas had subtly tried to neglect. I used some of my personal savings and arranged for a trust fund established by Mother to cover the costs. During this period, the manor felt quiet, almost waiting. Mrs. Gable and a small staff worked diligently, restoring the gardens Thomas had allowed to become overgrown, repairing the small structural issues he had ignored. The air slowly began to feel lighter, the oppressive weight of Thomas's presence lifting. The legal transfer of Blackwood Manor into my sole name was completed 6 months after the divorce. Holding the finalized documents, the deed officially registered with the county in Maine, felt like holding the culmination of a long, arduous battle. The estate was mine, secured against the avarice that had sought to claim it. Garrett had moved out weeks before, leaving the manor solely in my care. It was a responsibility I embraced, not just as an owner, but as a guardian of my family's history. With the legalities settled, I began the process of truly reclaiming Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just about maintenance. It was about breathing life back into the old stones, honouring Mother's memory by ensuring the estate thrived. I hired additional staff, oversaw extensive repairs, and began planning for the future, including potentially opening parts of the grounds for historical tours to help fund the colossal upkeep, a project Mother had often contemplated. During this time, I had no contact with Thomas. Elias had ensured that all communication went through his office, and Thomas, stripped of his resources and his scheme utterly failed, seemed to have faded into the background, a ghost of the life he had tried to steal. I assumed he was licking his wounds, perhaps attempting to rebuild his life elsewhere, though I doubted his fundamental nature had changed. My focus was entirely on the manor and rebuilding my own sense of peace. I spent my days immersed in the estate's history, working with Mrs. Gable to catalogue artefacts, walking the grounds, feeling the connection to the generations who had lived here before me. The betrayal still stung, a scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. I had faced the darkness and emerged, protecting what was precious. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, while I was meeting with the head gardener near the old rose bushes, Mrs. Gable approached me, her face etched with concern. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low, "there's a woman. She's on the property, down near the main gate. She's trying to get in." A woman? Visitors were rare without prior arrangement. "Did she say who she is?" She said she was Mrs. Croft," Mrs. Gable replied, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Your wife." My stomach clenched. Thomas, he must have sent someone. But who and why? "I haven't been Mrs. Croft for 6 months, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice firm, "and I don't have a wife. She's trespassing. Please ask her to leave immediately. If she refuses, call the county sheriff." Mrs. Gable nodded, her expression hardening with protective loyalty. She hurried towards the gate. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and anger. Who was this woman? A new accomplice? Someone Thomas had convinced to harass me? A few minutes later, I saw Mrs. Gable return, looking flustered. She refused to leave, Eleanor. She started shouting, said you owed her something, that she deserved to be here. I told her she needed to leave or I'd call the police, and she just got angrier. She tried to push past me, saying she had a right to enter. I had to physically block her. This was beyond anything I'd anticipated. Thomas resorting to sending someone to physically trespass and harass me? It was desperate, pathetic, and deeply unsettling. "Call the sheriff, Mrs. Gable," I instructed, pulling out my phone to call Elias. "Tell them we have a trespasser who is attempting to force entry and claiming a false identity to gain access to a private estate. Emphasize that she is claiming to be related to a former occupant who was legally removed from the property." As Mrs. Gable went to make the call, I saw the woman near the gate. She was pacing, agitated, occasionally shouting towards the manor. She wasn't anyone I recognized from my life with Thomas. Who was she? Elias answered on the second ring. I quickly explained the situation. "She's claiming to be my wife, Elias. Mrs. Croft. She's trying to force her way onto the property." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Elias said, "Eleanor, is there any chance? Could this be Kia?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Kia. The woman mentioned in the original story I had come across online, the one who had slept with her stepfather-in-law for the mansion. The details of that bizarre tale, which I had read months ago and largely dismissed as a strange internet anomaly, flooded back. The stolen mansion, the stepfather, the wife who believed the house was willed to him, it mirrored my own situation in the most twisted, horrifying way. But why would she be here? How would she even know about Blackwood Manor? "Kia?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "How is that possible? Why would she be here?" "I don't know, Eleanor," Elias said, his voice serious. "But if it is her, based on that story you showed me, she's clearly fixated on acquiring $1 million mansion through any means necessary. Perhaps she somehow connected Thomas's failed scheme with the original story, or perhaps she thought this was the mansion from that story. It's grasping at straws, but given her reported history, it's not impossible she's targeting any property that fits the description of a large, valuable estate tied to a complicated family situation. The sheer, mind-boggling audacity of it left me speechless. This woman, Kia, if it was indeed her, was so consumed by her desire for a mansion that she was now blindly targeting properties based on vague online stories. It was a level of delusion and avarice that was almost unfathomable. The sheriff arrived promptly, a stern-faced deputy who listened patiently as Mrs. Gable and I explained the situation. The woman, who identified herself as Kia when questioned by the deputy, continued to insist she had a right to be there, that she was the rightful owner, that I had stolen her house. Her story was rambling and incoherent, a bizarre mix of details that seemed pulled from the online narrative I had read and projections of her own twisted desires onto Blackwood Manor. She spoke of a stepfather, a will, a betrayal, but the specifics were jumbled, clearly not aligning with the reality of my family or this estate. The deputy, unimpressed by her claims and presented with clear evidence of my ownership and the recent divorce, informed her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately or face arrest. Kia became increasingly agitated, screaming that she wouldn't leave, that she wouldn't be cheated again. It took the deputy and a second officer, who arrived shortly after, to physically escort her off the property. As they led her towards their patrol car, she continued to shriek, wild accusations echoing across the quiet grounds. The encounter left me shaken, not just by the trespassing incident itself, but by the bizarre, almost surreal nature of Kia's delusion. It was a stark, unsettling reminder of the depths of greed and the strange ways it could manifest. Elias was right. She seemed to be blindly pursuing any property that vaguely resembled the one from the online story, projecting her failed scheme onto unrelated situations. It was both pathetic and deeply disturbing. Following this incident, Elias advised me to take further steps to protect Blackwood Manor from any future attempts by Kia or anyone else Thomas might foolishly involve. We applied for a restraining order specifically for the property, prohibiting Kia from coming within a certain distance of the estate boundaries. Given her history of harassment detailed in the online story and her actions at the gate, the request was granted. The restraining order provided a legal framework to prevent future trespassing and ensure she could be immediately arrested if she returned. Life at Blackwood Manor slowly returned to a semblance of peace after that. The incident with Kia was a jarring interruption, a strange echo of the betrayal I had endured, but it ultimately reinforced the importance of the victory I had achieved. I had protected my home, my history, my mother's legacy. The process of restoring the manor continued. I oversaw the replanting of the formal gardens, the restoration of the old library, the careful preservation of the antique furniture and artwork. Each step felt like healing, like reclaiming the space from the shadow of Thomas's deceit. Mrs. Gable remained a steadfast presence, her quiet competence and loyalty a source of comfort. I sometimes thought about Thomas, wondering where he was, what he was doing. I imagined him struggling, his ambition thwarted, his carefully constructed facade shattered. I felt no pity, only a cold satisfaction that he had received exactly what he deserved. His greed had cost him everything he had sought to gain. And Kia, the thought of her still sent a shiver down my spine. Her desperate, misguided pursuit of a mansion, her bizarre delusion, was a chilling testament to the destructive power of avarice. I hoped the restraining order and the reality of her situation would finally force her to confront her own issues, though I suspected her fixation ran deep. Blackwood Manor, standing stoic against the Maine coast winds, felt like a symbol of resilience. It had weathered storms, generations of life and loss, and now a calculated attempt at usurpation. And it had endured. My life wasn't the life I had envisioned when I married Thomas Croft. It was marked by betrayal and conflict, by the painful unravelling of a false reality. But it was also a life of strength, of strategic action, and of protecting what truly mattered. I stood on the cliff overlooking the ocean, the salty spray on my face, the vastness of the sea mirroring the sense of possibility that now lay before me. The chapter of Thomas Croft and his scheme was closed. The chapter of Eleanor Vance and Blackwood Manor was just beginning. The legacy was safe. Current part characters, 389 and 96, total characters, 477. The autumn turned to winter, bringing with it the stark beauty of the Maine coast under a blanket of snow. Blackwood Manor, with its thick stone walls and roaring fires, felt like a warm, secure haven against the biting wind. The legal battles were over, the divorce finalised, the estate secured. Thomas Croft was a ghost of the past, his schemes reduced to bitter memories and court documents. Kia, hopefully deterred by the restraining order and the clear reality that this was not the mansion from her fixated narrative, had not returned. Life settled into a new rhythm. I dedicated myself fully to the preservation and future of Blackwood Manor. Elias Thorne continued to be an invaluable resource, not just legally, but as a friend and advisor who understood the weight of the legacy I carried. We worked on establishing the historical preservation trust that Mother had envisioned, ensuring the estate would be protected for generations to come, regardless of future owners. I found a quiet satisfaction in the work, cataloguing the old books in the library, researching the history of the Vance family in the region, overseeing the skilled craftsmen repairing the intricate plasterwork. It was all part of honouring Mother and the life she had built. The manor was not just property, it was a living history, and I was its current steward. Occasionally I would receive updates through Elias about Thomas. He had apparently left Maine, his reputation here irrevocably damaged. He had attempted to start a new venture elsewhere, but his past seemed to follow him. The ambition that had driven him was still there, but without the easy access to wealth he had anticipated, and with the stain of his failed scheme, he struggled. I felt no schadenfreude, just a detached observation of the predictable consequences of his actions. Greed, unchecked and destructive, ultimately consumed the one who wielded it. Kia remained a strange, unsettling footnote to the entire ordeal. Elias mentioned that her name had come up in connection with a similar incident involving a property dispute in another state, a desperate attempt to insert herself into someone else's conflict. It seemed her obsession with acquiring a mansion through dubious means continued unabated, a sad and perhaps dangerous delusion. It was a stark contrast to my own fight, which had been about protecting something real and inherited, not seizing something through manipulation and deceit. Spring eventually arrived on the Maine coast, bringing with it the scent of thawing earth and the promise of new growth. The gardens at Blackwood Manor, dormant under the snow, began to stir, pushing forth crocuses and daffodils. I walked the grounds, feeling the soft ground beneath my feet, the warm sun on my face. The air was clean, free from the tension and deceit that had permeated it for so long. The legacy was safe. Blackwood Manor stood, a testament to my mother's foresight and my own resolve. The cost had been high, a shattered marriage, a betrayed trust, the pain of uncovering the true nature of someone I had loved. But the outcome was worth it. I had not only protected a valuable estate, I had protected the integrity of my family's history, and in doing so, reclaimed my own sense of self. The strategic determination that had carried me through the investigation and legal battle had settled into a quiet strength. I knew I could handle whatever challenges the future might bring. My focus was no longer on the past and the betrayal, but on the future and the potential of Blackwood Manor. Standing on the cliff, the vast Atlantic stretching out before me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The waves crashed against the rocks below, a constant, powerful rhythm. Like the manor, I had withstood the storm. I had been tested, and I had endured. The chapter of betrayal was closed. The story of Blackwood Manor and my life within it was unfolding, strong and secure. There were no more updates to be made. The chapter was, finally, finished. The summer months at Blackwood Manor were a period of intense activity and quiet healing. The gardens bloomed in vibrant colours, attracting visitors for the first time, as we cautiously opened a small section of the grounds for guided tours. The revenue generated was modest but symbolic, a step towards the self-sufficiency Mother had envisioned for the estate's long-term preservation. Working alongside Mrs. Gable and the growing staff, I found a deep sense of purpose in the meticulous care required to maintain such a historical property. My days were filled with overseeing renovations, researching historical details for the tours, and managing the complex finances of the estate. It was demanding work, requiring the same analytical skills I had honed in my previous career, but it was work that felt meaningful and directly connected to my family's legacy. The physical presence of the manor, solid and enduring, was a constant reminder of what I had fought for and won. Contact with the outside world was minimal, primarily through Elias Thorne, who handled any lingering legal matters or inquiries. He occasionally shared brief, impersonal updates about Thomas Croft, who seemed to have drifted further away, his attempts at regaining financial footing proving difficult. The public record of his divorce and the underlying reasons, while not sensationalized,